Welcome. We're just waiting for a few people to join the webinar. Just give it a couple more seconds. All right, might as well make a start, and those that are running a bit late can maybe watch the recording. So welcome to the 9th and actually last webinar in this live workshop series that we're running. So maybe a special cohort. And yes, I am not Tom as advertised. I'm Liam, who you may have seen from other webinars. Tom was away today, so I'm covering for him. And he definitely owes me a beer, given it's 10 o'clock in New Zealand, where I'm hosting this. So welcome all of you over in, I assume, UK or Europe. And this webinar is the third one also, which is more based on questions posed during registration process, and we'll open up to the floor as well during the webinar itself. So just a bit of housekeeping. I'll start sharing my screen just so you can see. As always, anything or most of what we're covering can often be accessed from our support site, which if you're in LT can be accessed from the drop down here. And there's also the LT community if you're wanting to ask questions to fellow LT users, and there's also ADI staff on there as well. In terms of interacting in this webinar, there's a couple of options available to you. So we have the chat function for saying hello, which a few people already have done so already. And if you have any questions to ask me, then please use the Q&A function. And either I'll answer that live, or the co-hosts, Marcus and Harriet, will be able to answer those as well, potentially. And I'll also release a poll at one stage as well, so that should hopefully pop up and you can choose the option that best suits you. So and just pointing out, at any time you can be asking questions as well. You don't have to wait for a particular time. So if something pops into mind as I'm discussing or introducing concepts, please just throw them up on the Q&A section. So going to address the questions that we've raised from those who registered to the webinar. And the first one is about integrating lessons with and importing data from other external data acquisition software or simulation tools. And this was touched upon a bit more extensively in a previous webinar on example data, but I'll cover some of the basics again just to help you out. So with data acquisition and LT, a reminder that behind the scenes, what it is the more research-orientated platform LabChart. So if I was to go into LT lesson and looking at data panel and editing this, we can start to see what's behind the scenes. I can show you how you can be going through the process of importing content from outside of LT into LT. So just to reiterate that the files that are needed to be imported into LT are either the settings file from LabCharts or the data file from LabCharts. And so if I was to open up the data file, this will open up in LabChart. And if you don't have LabChart and you're wanting to do this, please contact your ADI rep and we'll be able to sort you out. So we can see that the data that's embedded in LT is now displaying in LabChart. And what we'll notice is if you're needing to get data from outside of LT via LabChart, the best way to go about it, depending on what system you have, is to convert the data into essentially X and Y plots. And what you can do is, here's something I prepared earlier, is with that data in XY plots, you can have it as a simple text file, and then you can import that text file into LabChart. So if I go ahead and do that now, so I'm just going to open up in LabChart that text file. So this is where you would have exported from whatever other data acquisition or simulation tool that you're using. And obviously there's quite a few, and I won't try and cover all of them today, but if you are wanting to pull in data from another data acquisition software, then I'd recommend again reaching out to your local ADI rep who can help guide you through the process. But once you've managed to export that data from the external tool as a text file, then you can simply open it in lab charts and choosing times in the first column. And it was a very boring data file. Is simply 4 columns like this. And so, yeah, that's one way you can go about it. In terms of actually getting that text file, you can also go via Excel files. So if you have the XY plots, you can potentially just put them into Excel first and do any manipulations there, and then simply save that as a text file, and then you can open that as well. So just showing you what that looks like. If I was to do the same again, so on lab charts, opening that, and so yeah, we can see you can essentially replicate any XY plots that you've exported from another data acquisition tool, and then bring it back into LT. And then once again, bringing this, into LabChart, and then once again bringing this into LT. You just need to make sure that you save it as a LabChart data file, and then you can bring that into LT. So if we come back into LT and find that on your desktop, wherever you saved it, then you can drag that in. And you can see there, so a bit of tidying up. So removing all the extraneous channels, but yeah, hopefully that covers the basic principles of getting data from another data acquisition software that isn't an ADInstruments one, and bring it into LT. So yeah, there's a few more steps that might have to do depending on what the particular system is that you're wanting to pull in from into LT, but probably spent a bit more time than needed going over this particular aspect. So I'd recommend getting in touch with your local ADI rep who can walk you through the steps as they pertain to your particular data acquisition system. In terms of integrating lessons, LT lessons outside of LT. So generally the way I recommend is to use the get link option of LT. So if you are wanting students to access an LT lesson outside of LT, so to be directed to the LT lesson outside of LT, generally they'll be via your LMS. Then you'll need to navigate to the student work and find the lesson that is of interest. And in the drop down here, there's this option to get a link. And so you can open that, and that is the link that you'll embed into your LMS or wherever you're wanting to direct students from. So that's one way that you can start to integrate LT lessons to other tools that you might be using. And we do have a support site article that details how you can also do a few little tweaks. So if you want to direct students to a particular page of a lesson, then you can be changing it, the URL, and you can even customize it to be directing students to a module as well if you don't want to direct them to a particular lesson. So that's a very broad overview of how you can be trying to integrate LT with other tools or bringing in data from other tools into LT. And don't see any questions on that, so either that was not relevant or or made complete sense. So I'm actually going to open up a poll now just to get an idea of where participants or attendees you're wanting to focus on, or you want me to focus on. So coming up now should be a poll, so I'll give you maybe 20-30 seconds just to read the options and choose which ones you'd like me to focus on in particular. remembering that you can ask for more specific area or questions using the Q&A function. All right, so we've got some coming in already. Looks like data recording's off to a good lead. Just wait for a couple more responses. Surprised Zoom hasn't put in a feature for sweet, what do you call it, elevator music when a poll is playing. All right, so I'm going to end the poll there, and looks like, yeah, data recording and publishing and availability are two areas that I'd like to explore. So while I'm kind of riffing on this, if you have any particular aspects of those areas, those that responded to the poll that you'd like me to focus on, by all means, type into the Q&A or the question and answer function in Zoom, and I can focus more specifically. So I might look at publishing and availability first and just go through the simple processes to do that. And if anything is unclear, by all means, yeah, please use the chat function or the Q&A function. All right, so starting off the basics, that if you have, say, imported some of the ADI content, so let's bring in some of the nice new anatomy content, you'll see that once you've imported this or these lessons, or if you've created a lesson from scratch, you'll be able to publish either the lesson by itself using this publish option up here, or, and this is generally the path that I recommend, is publishing the module, because generally what I've found is that lessons often aren't standalone, and generally they'll be able to be grouped by theme. So for example, often you'll have maybe a pre-lab prep lesson, and then you've got the lab lesson itself, and then maybe a quiz after that, and all of those say are related to, in this case, would be blood pressure or maybe some other cardiovascular topic. So the principle is the same though, that whether it's a lesson or a module, you'll be publishing those. So I'll find one that's actually got a lesson in it. So I'll quickly add some lessons to this module, because you can't publish a module that doesn't have any lessons in it. So now we can see again, same as with a lesson, there's this option to publish that particular module. And regardless if it's a lesson or a module that you're publishing, you'll see that when you select the publish option that you have two paths that you can take. One is to make that lesson or module immediately available to students, or if you prefer, you can set the availability of that module or lesson for a future date, and you can even set a commit time as well. So in this case, I'm just going to show you what it's like when you select make available now. And you notice that straight away been taken from the lessons card to the student work card, and you can see the lesson that you've recently published and made available. And you can check the availability at any time by selecting the availability option, and we can see that it's now available to the two sections that have been created. And burrowing down into each section, you can choose either to clear the availability if you accidentally made it available, or you can change the availability. Say, for example, you made it available now by accident, and you meant to set it for maybe a week from now to be available. So assuming that was the option, or what you did, then choosing change availability allows you to set the day that it's going to become available and to the time as well. And LT is smart enough to recognize your local time zone. So don't worry, it's not always going to be referenced to New Zealand Standard Time. It will be based on your particular time zone. And as I mentioned before, you can add a commit time to that lesson. And so just to clarify what this will do, it will mean that at that particular day and time, the lesson will be automatically committed for the students, and they will not be able to edit any of their answers beyond that. They'll still be able to view the lesson, see all the answers they've put in, check any answers, any model answers, but they can't change anything. So once you hit done, you'll see LT displays when that lesson is going to become available and for how long as well. At any time as well, you can come back and tweak that if you realize that maybe you've made a mistake. And also, if it comes to, say, lab time and students can't see the lesson and you realize that, yeah, maybe you've got your dates wrong, at any time you can also make the lesson immediately available to students. And for a bit of sanity checking, you can select the student view and see what lessons have been made available. And ideally, any that you've set to become available in the future won't be displayed here, because otherwise that means students would be seeing them and you've likely not set the incorrect date. Also to keep in mind, if you are using sections as students, then you can toggle between the different sections just to get an idea of what lessons are available or modules are available for each section of students. And so that was the workflow to publish an individual lesson, and quickly to show it for a module, very similar. Under the modules card, find the module that you want to publish, assuming you've got the lessons that you want in there, and then you can go through the same process and make it available straight away or in the future. So make it available straight away. And one thing to keep in mind is that the lessons that are available in that module at the time of publishing and making it available will be available straight away. But say, for example, you realize that you want to add a quiz to that module after you've made it available. So this can still be done. So you can edit the module and say add another lesson or two. And then importantly, you have to essentially re-update that module or republish it. And you'll be prompted to do that with this little option down here. So when you select that, you'll be taken again to the student work card of that module, and you can just select update to latest. Often you might see a pop-up warning like this, and yeah, it's just giving you a bit of an idea of what changes are about to happen, and also letting you know that you need to set the availability for the 2 or however many lessons you've added to that module. So thankfully LT gives you a bit of a warning saying that, hey, some of the lessons that you've added don't have availability set. So that means students won't be able to see them. And so you can choose for each of those lessons what you'd like the availability to be, whether you want to just make it available to all sections straight away, or say for this one, you want to stagger the release by section. So there's a lot of granularity that you can get into with publishing and availability. As always, you can go to the support sites if you're needing a bit of a refresher on any of this, or you can reach out to your support rep or CSM to help you through this, or you can watch a recording of this as well. So that's a very brief overview, or actually not too brief overview of publishing and availability. And again, I'm not seeing any questions or comments coming up in the chat, so assuming I nailed that and everyone's completely okay with publishing availability now. All right, so maybe all right. And the other area that people were requesting to talk about, so that's data recording, and it's I guess I maybe should have been a bit more specific in my poll as to particular aspects of data recording, but here we go. Let's riff on this theme as well. So data recording in LT, really touched upon a wee bit before in terms of how to get pre-recorded data from another system outside of LabChart, PowerLab environments into LT. But in terms of data recording actually in LT, I'll open up that blood pressure lab again. And just pointing out actually a new feature, and that's quite handy, is that when you're looking at a lesson that is available in a module, you can see it listed in this option when you're looking at the lesson details card. So, going back to data recording and jumping to a page that has the particular panel types that allow for data recording, and point out that if you're wanting students to do live data acquisition or data recording in LT, you will need a couple of things. One is a PowerLab system. So if you're not familiar with PowerLabs, that's a whole whole branch that I might not delve into now, but essentially it's a bit of hardware that allows for data acquisition to occur. So for biological signals to be digitized and displayed in LT. And the PowerLab requires a bit of intermediary software in order to communicate with LT, and that is the Kura Cloud desktop application. So this needs to be installed on all devices that you're wanting to do live data acquisition on, and this is something that if you haven't already, you'll be needing to talk to your IT department to make sure that you can get this installed on all the lab computers, and make sure that it can be updated automatically as well, that there's no pesky proxies or firewalls that might be blocking any updates. So assuming that's all fine, you've got PowerLab and you've got KCDA running, then you should be able to do live data acquisition. And what you'll notice actually in this data panel here, where data recording takes place, is that it's actually grayed out. That's because given current situation with most labs not being able to be done face-to-face, there's a newish now feature in LT that means any example data is going to be displaying by default in LT. So I'm going to toggle that off. And if you're not familiar with the example data by default in LT, that's a course-wide setting. So if you're wanting to change this, it's under settings for the course, and then you've got example data settings. And so I'm just going to change it from on by default to, let's say, on with access code. And then going back into that lesson, should be able to see that now the start button is not grayed out, and you can actually start recording. And so while you can't see what I've got set up here at home, is I've got a PowerLab already connected and turned on. And so fingers crossed when I hit start, realizing that I've got lab chat open, which might be competing with LT. And there we go. So I don't have any peripherals connected, so I don't have any, say, ECG electrodes or force transducers. So it's, again, a very boring trace coming in, but it's still getting across the concept that you can have live data coming in, and students can be changing scales, both X and Y, for each of the channels. You'll also notice that there's live readouts of the values that are coming in, and those are in two different forms. So we've got this value panel down here, which is just a bit nicer, a bit bigger, and color-coded. But there's also the readouts on each of the panels as well that are displaying. So at any time, students can stop and go back and actually make sure that what they recorded was actually scientifically possible or valid. And then depending on the lesson that you're using, whether it's an ADI lesson or a bespoke lesson, you might have the analysis on the same page or on another page. And so ADI lessons have splits, the activity pages and analysis pages too. And generally the data panels are aliased, and realizing this may have been a lesson that I've tinkered with in the past, and I severed the aliasing of the two panels. or potentially internet's decided to give up the ghost. Always good when you're doing a live webinar, right? So if you do get the spinning wheel, there's a couple of options that you can do. One is to refresh the page, because as always, LT is a browser, and if you do need to do troubleshooting, refreshing the page can be a good option. If it's still spinning, then you can reset the hardware. And so for data recordings, holding down Shift on the keyboard and then clicking Start brings up two options. One is the reset hardware option, and one is the use example data option. And so in this case, I'm going to reset the hardware and walk through the steps. So I've closed down Lab Chart, and I'll do the classic turn it off and on. So bear with me as I try and awkwardly, there we go. And then checking that's actually all plugged in, turn back on, and then restarting. So this will restart that CurriCloud desktop application that I mentioned before. And when you hit continue, it will also refresh the page. And this is where I cross both my fingers and toes that it's going to play ball. And this is when I go, oh, it's not. And move on to another lesson. So with data recording, yeah, it's something that, yeah, definitely want to be making sure or testing before it goes live to students. All right, so still not seeing any questions coming in around that. And looking at the time, might move on to the last area that was requested to be talked about, which was student accounts. And this is essentially being able to actually grant students access to LT. And there's a couple of ways to go about that. Generally the easiest way, because likely you'll be dealing with quite large numbers of students and you don't want to be adding them one by one, is to use the CSV file import. And thankfully, again, there's another support site article that guides you through the process for this. And so essentially what you need is a CSV file that has these columns set up and should be able to easily export a class list from your LMS and import it into a Excel file and save as a CSV file set up here. The main column that is not optional is the email column. So that's what everything is tied to for the students. So the student ID, given name, family name, and section are all optional, but they are useful to have. So just pointing out with sections, that's what I mentioned before, where you can break students into different sections. So say, for example, if you have different lab streams and you want to make sure that students are only getting access to the content when the lab stream would be, and then that would be one example of using sections. Or maybe if you've got external and internal cohorts of students. So once you've set up your CSV file, you can, and this is where I see if I actually have one. Thank you, previous Liam, who had that sitting on his desktop. And so if I select OK, it'll not really do too much because I've actually really imported myself. There's also the third option for creating student accounts, and that's to integrate LT with your LMS, assuming your LMS is either Canvas, Blackboard, or Moodle, that we do have native integrations with those LMSs. And that's something, again, that's a bit more involved, needing your IT departments, etc., to sign off. And that would be another one where reference or refer you to your ADI support rep or CSM. So I might look to wrap it up there unless there's any last minute questions that people want to ask, but it's looking like it's a quite a bunch of people. So yeah, I might stop it there and say thank you for attending. And if you have any questions that come to mind after this, either to reach out to myself or your ADI rep, or jump on the LTE community and ask questions there, and either someone from ADI or maybe a fellow LTE user will answer it there. So thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your days. Cheers.